Yeah.
Yep. I'm going to start off by letting everybody go around and introduce themselves. We'll start at the top with Paul.
Hi, my name's Paul Johnson. I'm the author of Smoke Without Fire. I had a live in Rotherham, work in Sheffield, so I've been spent most of my life in South Yorkshire, so that's my neck of the woods. Very much looking forward to the panel today.
Great. Andy?
Hi everybody, Andy Barrett. I'm a CSI working in Yorkshire, and I suppose I'm most well known for the Eddie Collins series of books. He's also a CSI working in Yorkshire, strangely enough. I've also done the Socko Roger Coniston trilogy. Again, he's a Socko working in Yorkshire. You can see a bit of a theme going on here, can't you? I've also written 3 or 4 novellas on that same subject as well, and a standalone called The End of Lies. Good to be here, by the way.
Good to have you here. Nick?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Nick Bontrell. I'm the writer of the Joe Geraghty series of private investigator novels set in my home city of Hull. I originally thought it was going to be a trilogy of novels, which I wrote and finished a few years back. But I published by Fahrenheit Press what we might call the 4th in the trilogy on Friday, called Sand of the Sinners. And it very much looked at post-City of Culture Hull, which is where I live and work.
Great. So before we get going on anything else, do you want to tell us a little bit about the locations that you feature in your books and why you've all chosen to set them in Yorkshire? And we'll start with Paul. We'll just keep going around in that order. So we'll start with Paul.
Yeah, I suppose in terms of location, it's writing about what I know in some respects, and it's the sort of stuff that fascinates me, whether it's location or people or characters, just the different things that are there just around the corner, the things you don't know, whether it's the beautiful canal setting that's literally around the corner from the red light district in Attercliffe in Sheffield, or you know, different places that aren't necessarily what they seem. So yeah, I think it's writing what I know rather than I wouldn't, for example, try to write a crime thriller based in Newcastle because it wouldn't have that kind of authenticity and feel about it. So yeah, that's me right around the area that I know well.
It's the same for me too. I live in Leeds, and all my books are set in Leeds. And it's the same as it is for me. It is for Paul. You look out of your window and you've got a huge variation of cityscapes, landscapes, anything you want to play with, just more or less on your doorstep. And that's what comes of living in Yorkshire, the best county on earth, really, isn't it? So you've got such a variance. And also, I mean, Leeds, for me, it sparkles and it's dull at the same time. It's a horrible place and it's absolutely brilliant as well. And that's just nirvana for a writer, really, isn't it? It's gold dust.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm kind of the same as Paul and Andy in that sense, that Hull's the city I live in and the city I work. But I've always been a big fan of Ian Rankin and the Rebus novel set in Edinburgh. So I kind of wanted to do what Ian did for Edinburgh for Hull. Even though it was kind of like, you know, Hull's kind of like, if Leeds isn't very glamorous, and I don't know if Hull's even less glamorous than Leeds, isn't it, really? And it's kind of like the cousin at the end of the line, isn't it? So, but that's great as a writer as well, because when I first started writing the Joe Geraghty novels, nobody else was really writing about the city. It felt like I was doing it in isolation. So it was kind of a chance for me to sort of put a stake in the ground and say, you know, this is my city and I want to kind of explore it on the page. And I think as much as anything, it's a conversation between me and the city to try and, so I can understand it really. Because like Andy and Paul have said, there's the gritty and there's the kind of shiny parts, isn't there? And you get that in Hull as well as in Sheffield and in Leeds. So yeah, it was very much, I want to write about my home city and explore it, to try and explain it to myself and then to a wider readership, I think.
So while we're there, what are the kind of uniquely sort of features of your cities that you include in them, or the unique features of like a Yorkshire person that you think you include? We'll start at the top of Paul again.
Sorry, technical difficulties. I missed the last part of some of the questions.
I said,
Could you just repeat that?
What are the unique?
Such a wonderful flying start.
What are the unique features about your city or Yorkshire people that you want to include in your books that you wish that people knew about?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I've written. I have one crime novel that's available now. I've written 3, and it's the first one was As First Novels Go. It was a nice idea and probably classed as a first novel. But the reason I mention it is that that was more interested in place and location and so on. The one that's available now, I probably got very, just kind of trying to find my feet as a crime writer. And it was probably more people than location, more people focusing on characterization and plot. As I'm progressing, so the one I've just finished that I am hawking around agents and so on, and it starts to invest more in place in Rotherham and so on. So I think the book that we're talking about probably isn't massively something that you'd read and go, wow, that's something set in Yorkshire. It was more about people that you can probably get on any street in this city where I'm sat now, or anywhere else in the country. And you've got that kind of cliche of, nobody knows what goes on behind closed doors. It's getting deeper into that in terms of people, and nobody knows what's going on necessarily in your neighbour's mind or your loved one's mind, the people that you're close to. That kind of layers of people and what they chose to share and disclose. So it's that this particular book, The Smoke Without Fire, is very much more that than something that's a solid Yorkshire thing. It won't make you think of Last of the Summer Wine or Emmerdale, I promise.
Andy, what about you?
I like the Yorkshire people. They're a gritty bunch, and they're also extremely generous, very kind with their time and their money. Very kind with their time. I couldn't resist putting that little bit in. I like the landmarks as well, like the police landmarks, the Killybeck that's now closed, the Ellen Road station that's been built, and also the village names as well. There was a book I wrote, Eddie Collins No. 4, called Ledston Look, and I chose that name. I couldn't resist writing a book set in Ledston Look just because of the name. I was also going to write one in Monk Fryston as well, because that's another name that just buzzes around my head. I love it. But Ledston Look, it's a tiny little village stuck up in sort of East Leeds, and it used to be a coal mining town, and it shriveled up during the miners' strike, and lots of strife for the local people around there. And it's a splendid little village, gorgeous, one street, that's all there is, and it's just countryside. And I went up there on a job several years ago, and I was startled by it. It sounds cliche, but startled by its beauty. And I thought, this is magnificent. And more or less around the same time, I was driving through the village of Woodlesford, you might know it, and there's a river and a canal more or less next to each other. And as I'm driving over the river, I happened to look left into the water, and I swear it wasn't, obviously, but it looked just like there was a dead woman under the water there. If you know anything about the way I write, I start with a scene and I try and grow a book from that. Well, I got the image of this woman under the water, and I thought, oh, that'd be brilliant, would that? And I'd also had another image of a farmhouse, an old stone-built farmhouse with a woman sitting in a wooden rocking chair in this farmhouse kitchen, and she had a shotgun leant against the doorframe by her side, and all these 3 images merged into one book. If you I had the Ledston Look for me, location, and I had 2 characters as well, and it all just grew from there, almost organically. I had hardly anything to do with it. I was just typing. I was just the pilot. So Yorkshire for me, honestly, you can't beat it as a location. It's terrific.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, I've been very, very fortunate that when I wrote the first Joe Geraghty novel, Hull had just been crowned the UK Crap Town of the Year. Now, by the time I'd finished, I've just published the 4th one by Sam of the Sinners. We're looking back at it being the UK City of Culture. It's been on this amazing journey from Crap Town to City of Culture. So that's given me that kind of really unique backdrop to the crime novels, what I can draw upon, because I'm really interested in that kind of intersection of politics and money, and kind of all the sort of sociological sort of stuff around that. So for me, I've been kind of really lucky, and Sound of the Sinners is very much about what the place is like after the City of Culture, after it has gone out, after that winning and it's about power and it's about money. So it's kind of set in a city that only it can only be Hull effectively for these books. Hull's been on this completely different to just hit it at the right moment effectively. And I guess like Andy and Paul were saying about the characters, they're of the city. I think in the Joe Garrity novels, Joe himself was a former, Hull.
I think we're losing Nick. You're frozen.
Frozen? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can now, Nick.
Okay. Oh, okay. I was rattling on there.
Nope, he's frozen again. I'm just going to take him out the stream and see if that helps. There we go.
I'm back in.
Yeah,
is that better?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
You can hear me now. So what it was, I was rattling on about Hull One Tie as a kind of unique. Have I frozen again?
A little bit, yeah. Shall we move on? There's a good question on the stream. And I think what you were going to say was that Joe used to be a rugby player for Hull.
It did used to be, yeah, because Hull's very much known for rugby league, isn't it? It's known for rugby league, fishing, John Prescott, I think, by a lot of people. But by making him a rugby league player, straight away, you're alienating half of the readership because you're either Hull FC or you're Hull PR. So, straight away, you've got something that's important to the city that you can play with the tension of it in the story, which makes it kind of different and unique, I think, and makes him a little bit different as a character as well.
We've got a really good question on the stream, and I think it's going to be a little bit different maybe for Nick when we get to him. But it says, has the miners' strike and its effect on the area affected your writing? And I don't think mining, I might be wrong about Hull. We're probably talking more about the fishing industry effect in Hull, aren't we, when we get to you, Nick?
Yeah.
If we go in the same order again, start with Paul.
Yeah, I mean, the miners' strike was huge in South Yorkshire in general, and very much in Sheffield. There was a steelworkers' strike pretty much alongside it that my family were involved in. The impact on the community, and it still goes on to this day. You hear about the Battle of Orgreave. I drive through there on the way to work. There's a fantastic book called The Lytton Path, written set in a fictional village in South Yorkshire, but set at that time that I've just read. Absolutely superb. Things like that, and the Hillsborough disaster and the horrific mismanagement of that, basically have led to deep mistrust of South Yorkshire police in the area. I'm not anti-police in any way, can I just make that very clear? I'm really not, but the extent to which, people were involved in the miners' strike in fairly quite horrific violence, with scenes that almost look battlefield, with the numbers ripped off the column and doing things that you would not expect anyone to do, let alone somebody in a role around law and order. That kind of mistrust is still there many decades on, and that feeds through some of how things feel as a community, and certainly how I feel and how I write about police and police responses. That's in no way going police bad, but there's an element in there where you just don't know. There's a sourness, or maybe there isn't anymore, but there's from my point of view, there's that sense of a sourness of something off within a big police force, which won't be representative of them all, but it's there, and it's always there. So it does have an effect on how your writing responses. Inevitably, we write crime. There has to be police involved. It does have an impact on how you get that across. So it always fascinates me.
I'm not anti-police either.
Say that again.
So I'm not anti-police either.
No, well, you work for them.
Exactly. But even though I work for the police, I'm not blind. I can remember stories of 1984, the miners' strike. I can remember stories of that quite clearly, and some of the coppers there managed to get holidays out of the miners, basically, didn't they, by doing the overtime that was available to them. It swings and roundabouts, I suppose. There's stories about good policing and bad policing. So it's something that's part of our culture now, and you've got to learn to accept it and move on. But just going back to the Ledston Look story, which is based around a mining town that was decimated in the 1984 strike, you look around lots of West Yorkshire towns and you can see signs of the old collieries and the old slag heaps and Pontefract and stuff along the M62 there. So it's still around. Our coal industry is dead now, unfortunately, but it's still alive in the memories of many people who are around today. And I thought that was an excellent backdrop, an excellent foundation for Ledston Look, and I chose to take it and run with it. And again, that's based on what you might call police corruption back then, but on a very small scale, I suppose, compared to what Paul's been talking about. But it's still there. Police are people. You wave a carrot in front of them, someone will go for it. So that's Ledston Look is an old mining village, and it's next to the winding tower that's still there. And if you go around various parts of West Yorkshire now, you'll find the old winding wheels in middle of roundabouts and such. And it's great to see, and I'll never forget them days.
Yeah, it's not too different in a lot of ways for me writing about Hull, although we're not a mining city. As said, it's about fishing. And the trawler industry completely was wiped out in the mid-70s. And that's something that's kind of there in my book as well, really. It's kind of very much about what it's like when you take away work from a generation of people. What's left over from that, and what impact does that have? And that inevitably feeds through into crime, doesn't it? So that's kind of like really fertile ground, I think, for me as a crime writer. Particularly my first Joe Garrity novel, Broken Dreams, that's very much about the death of the fishing industry and people who used to work on the trawlers, and how things can kind of linger from that loss of work in the mid-70s through to the present day, really. So, Hull's very much a city, as a backdrop to my novels, that's very much searching for a new identity, really, and it's been trying to do that through culture and leisure, which is something that's very much at the fore in The Sound of the Synners, a new one, this idea of kind of new money in the city and new ways of doing things. But, I think, as Paul said about his novels, this undercurrent of the past is always there, and, you can't change the character of a city what kind of previously been industrial, I don't think. So, I think that's really interesting kind of opportunities for us as crime writers to explore in all sorts of different ways.
There's a really good question on the stream from one of our admins, Sam Brownlee. She says, do you have a favourite character that you've created?
Are we going in the same order?
Yep.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Yes, I do. I really do. When I started to write Smoke Without Fire, there was clearly going to be a body count. And I didn't want to write a police procedural. I love reading police procedurals, but my heart wasn't in doing the research and writing in that way. So with the body count and the police inevitably being involved, I created a character, a journalist. She was married to a police officer, and it was only meant to be a kind of a means to an end. It was a tool, it was a technique, so that we could get that genuine kind of sense of there's something going on in the police investigation, but without having, the police themselves being a big character, the main investigating officer or anything else. So that was just a pure technique. I expected to have a minor role in it. And as soon as I started writing her, she just started to misbehave. She started to do what she wanted to do. It didn't matter that I saw a small character just for the ends that I've described. So that became an absolute joy to write, and a much bigger character than I ever expected her to be in the book. I didn't set out. For me, this is a experienced journalist in her mid-40s, full of attitude, and she has ended up, because I just fell in love with her, really, she's ended up being the protagonist in my next book, which I really wasn't expecting. So it really was, as I say, just a technique, and all of a sudden somebody just came to life, and those chapters wrote themselves. It's an absolute joy to experience.
Mine was probably Eddie Collins, and the reason he came about is I'd just finished the Dead trilogy featuring Socko, Roger Coniston, and I wanted to start another crime book, but this one was sort of set into the near future where a bad government had come to power and they wanted to put in the new death penalty, the third rule. But Roger Coniston, he's a nice guy, and he just wasn't the vehicle right for this story. I needed somebody else, somebody with a bit more verve, a bit more hatred in them, I suppose. And I created Eddie Collins. But I suppose loosely based on myself. He's a bit of a caricature of me. He's far more powerful than I ever could be or would be. Although I'd like to be him sometimes. I think the things that he does and the things that he says, he's far braver than I am. But I created Eddie Collins for this one specific book, this third rule, and I never anticipated it going any further than this. But when I finished the third rule, I had this red hot character, and that, to me, it was not boring. You read a lot of books where the protagonist is a nice guy and he's a George Gently type, or he's even a Frost type, because even Frost is a little bit gentle sometimes for my liking. And I'd invented this guy called Eddie Collins, and he was a right swine. He was rude, you know, and he gave back what the gaffers were giving to him twice as hard. And he wasn't afraid of walling people up and to get his own way. And his own way was to find justice. That's all it was. It's like we all write about these protagonists in crime fighting who go out who want justice for the victims. And Eddie's no different, but he's carrying along a load of baggage with him. And I've tried to avoid the cliche. He was an alcoholic in the first book, the third rule, and I could have kicked myself for that because everybody writes alcoholics. So I had him packing in the alcohol, and he's not touched a drop since. But he still carries a lot of mental baggage with him. And the last book, this Side of Death, it's called. We find out. I'm hinting at what this mental baggage is, and a lot of people have really grasped it. If you read some of the reviews, they're outstanding, thankfully, because I wrote him being such a horrible character, not going out purposefully to have the reader like him, but over a series, you understand why he's so evil, why he's so angry all the time. And the sixth book gives a little bit of a hint as to why he is so angry. And I hope in the seventh, which I'll start writing later on this year, maybe even next year now, we might see a conclusion to it. I don't know.
Yeah, and for me, I'd have to pick Joe Geraghty because he's the protagonist in the series, and I write them in the first person, so it's very much, we're always in Joe's world in the novel. So yeah, I have to pick him really, and he came about by accident almost because I wrote a police novel to start with, going back to that kind of sense of Ian Rankin writing about Edinburgh. I tried to write a copper, and I ended up more or less just transporting Rebus to Hull, and it became quite obvious that what I'd written, wasn't publishable. So I went back to the drawing board thinking, well, I know nothing about police procedure, really. I need to think of a different route into a crime novel, like Paul was talking about, The Journalist. And I kind of came up with a private eye idea, and I wanted to explore that idea of taking that very much American template from the 1930s that sort of people like Raymond Chandler created with Philip Marlowe, and trying to transport that and put it into a modern-day northern city. That seemed like an interesting challenge. So Joe Geraghty was born out of that, really. And as Andy was talking about, the character's becoming more complex, and I think Joe's become the same. When we meet him in book one, he's a fairly recent widow, and he's searching for answers into his wife's death. And then as the books progress, he gets involved with the woman, which causes him trouble in his professional life with his partners. And then into the Crooked Beat, the third book, is very much a personal investigation for him when he's looking into an incident involving his brother and his nephew. So when we pick him up in book 4, the new one, Sound of the Sinners, he's very much a blank slate again. He's had all these troubles and he's kind of making a fresh start, but he's still carrying that baggage along with him. So in many respects, he's still a really interesting character for me to write. And as I say, writing him in the first person just means I'm in his head an awful lot more than any other character. So that kind of does make him more of a natural fit for me. But as Paul said, sometimes characters do take on a life of their own. And there's one in Sound of the Sinners who's he's an ex-footballer with a bit of money, and it's very easy to be a small town hero in a place like Hull. So I had a lot of fun with him opening this kind of like glitzy, sort of quite brash nightclub on the Fruit Market area, which is where all the big money's gone post-regeneration. And he's kind of like a small-town Paul Gascoigne almost, and being a big football fan, I had an awful lot of fun writing that character when I was kind of writing his scenes. But yeah, it's always the main protagonist for me, I think.
Why did you go for first person? I mean, I've written some novellas in first person with Eddie Collins, and these are Chandler-esque as well. I really love writing in first person. It's brilliant. I'm not sure I could carry it on for a full novel with Eddie Collins, but why did you go for first person?
I think it was because the private eye thing is kind of built up on the first person, isn't it? As you say, those kind of novels are all first person. So I did actually sort of I did write the first Joe Garrity novel in first person and third person, the first few chapters, and it just felt more comfortable and instinctively writing the first person. And I say it's pros and cons, isn't it? Because it does limit you as a writer in terms of you're always in Joe's head or your protagonist's head, and you kind of have to write what's going on around him in a more subtle way, I suppose, and actually having other characters doing it for you. So, yeah, I mean, the novel I'm working on at the moment is in the third person with more characters and more viewpoints, which maybe is a reaction to writing in the first person over the last 4 novels. But yeah, it's pros and cons, isn't it? But I like the first person.
Yeah, I always find it really interesting to read novels that are written in first person. My first attempt at a novel was first person, but it's because I didn't understand the pros and cons and the limitations and all the rest of it. So I found myself then writing in third person and being comfortable with it. But having been through that kind of learning experience, to then see it done well in the first person is fantastic, because it's so different. You are in their head. It is as a reader, I might not want to read that way all the time, but most books aren't. So to get a good first person on my bookshelf or my to be read pile is great.
Before I go back, there's loads of questions on the screen, but before I go back to them, is there anything when you're writing your books that you're sort of putting in from your city and your point of view that you kind of feel might need a bit of explanation for anyone who reads them who's not from Yorkshire? I'm thinking of like your rugby league or like certain words that you use. Have you ever had anyone be confused about things that you've put in your books?
No, I don't think so. I've not written anything like the number of books as my friends here have. So perhaps that's why. I try to not write in dialect. It's tempting at times because it really grounds it. If you're from that area, it's fantastic. If you're not from that area, it can be a massive hurdle. I remember the first time I picked up Train Spotting, and man, I had to work at that book for a long time before I got used to it. So no, I don't think there's anything uniquely South Yorkshire that people wouldn't get. If I find there's something in there, I try to just smooth it out enough so it doesn't alienate people. I guess that's as much as I can say on that one for me.
I stay away from dialect as well. I don't think there's too much point in dialect really. It's good if it's accurate and it's readable. Otherwise, it just sounds like science fiction gobbledygook to me. But the only thing that I get asked a fair amount about is the jargon used in police procedurals. Well, if you're watching a film with jargon in, you don't stop and make inquiries on Google as to what this means, do you? I suppose you can do that with a book because you're not disturbing anybody else. But I'd rather listen to a bit of jargon because it adds realism to me. And even if I don't know what it means, you get it within the context of the story or the plot or whatever's going on, the scene you're writing, and just go with it. But I do get asked occasionally what this means or what that means. I once got asked recently, what does pissed off mean? Look it up. If you're really interested, look it up, you know. But I did a poll on my readers a couple of years ago asking, do you want a glossary of terms putting in? And I think about 80% said no. We'll work it out from the context. A few said yes, we'd like that, but I'll go with the flow. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on there, isn't it? It's about context, especially with police novels. You know, you soon pick it up, don't you? And yeah, again, I don't write in dialect. I can kind of recommend a really good whole novel written in dialect, which is "Scream If You Want to Go Faster" by Russ Litton, which is amazing. It works really well written in the whole dialect, a bit like Train Spotting worked for the Scottish accent, or Roddy Doyle with his Irish novels. It works, but you know, to keep yourself in that voice constantly and consistently, I think is incredibly difficult. But yeah, I do try and sneak the odd whole thing in, and I've had kind of the publisher come back to me, and it's almost like a translation thing with a foreign translation where they say, "What's a patty? He's been eating a patty. What's one of those?" or what's a 10-foot when he's hiding down a 10-foot around the back of a house? So you kind of, oh, house is collapsing around me. There are occasional words where I do kind of want to put them in, because they are specific code words, and like you say, it's about context and not making the reader do too much work. I think you don't want to pull someone out of the story, do you, by making them think what does that word actually mean. So yeah, I don't go overboard. It's just the occasional word here and there, but more just to try and give a flavour of what the city's like, I think. But yeah, I mean, I think writing in the first person is helpful as well, because then I can kind of explain it in a different way to where you may be kind of outside of the character's head. It's a lot more straightforward, I think, in the first person in that sense.
Just one other comment on dialect, actually. I was just thinking as I was listening to you both. I grew up in Sheffield. About as North Sheffield as you can get. It's a stone's throw into Barnsley. They don't say Barnsley. They speak in a very different language. They even have their own words in Barnsley that don't mean anything outside of Barnsley. So that's probably something in the back of my head. I could have gone 3 miles and people are using words that they've just made up and used locally for generations. So, someone in Scotland or someone on the south coast, I don't stand much chance of writing in that kind of way.
Yeah. We're back to that old argument.
No offence.
It's what you call a bread cake, isn't it? A bread cake is a roll.
Yeah. Fish cakes as well. Let's not get into all that. Yeah.
We've got another question on the stream that says, has it been difficult to promote your work this year, particularly around hectic day jobs? Do you want to tell us what all your day jobs are as well, if you have them?
I have the thrillingly exciting job of working in local government, which is obviously everyone dreams of that as a small child, don't we? That's what you're an astronaut or local government. So I manage 1 or 2 teams around, not in education proper. I'm not a teacher or an educationalist, but around schools, the services that the council provide that relate to schools and education is kind of the day job. Yeah, I've found promotion difficult, as I guess most people do that work full time as well as trying to write. There's how much time, how much energy. Also, naturally, I'm a bit like, I've written something, here it is. I've worked really hard on it. It's had 10 drafts. I think it's all right. You might want to have a read of it. That's beyond that, I start getting uncomfortable. I don't like the promotional side of things. I understand it's a necessity, and I'm inherently bad at it because it's just a very uncomfortable area for me. I think the other side is as well with a family, and my kids are now leaving home, but I've been writing as they've been growing up. 3 kids, busy household, full-time job and everything else. You kind of go, here's a golden hour or 2. Do I write or do I try and promote? No, I'll write. And it's been that kind of choice at times, as well as instinctively shying away from it. So I don't know that this year's been any different from any other with the lockdown and everything. I think I'm just naturally a little adverse to it, which is not going to help, is it?
I'm a CSI crime scene investigator in Yorkshire, and it does help me to write my books. I can use it for the technology. I don't go anywhere near victims or suspects or true crime, anything like that. I might use it for technology and a bit of lingo between characters, but that's about all. As far as promotion is concerned, same as Paul, I'm useless at it, horrible at it. It cost me a lot of money, earned none from it. And if I've got a spare hour, do I write or do I promote? Yeah, let's write. It wins every time, can't help it. I've got a newsletter. I try to promote that as much as possible. About 8,000 people on that, I suppose, something like that, which is great. If you tell them that there's a new book coming out, you see a sales spike, but after that, it just sort of falls away a little bit. If you're interested, by the way, I do give away 2 books if you join my newsletter.
Can I have one?
Yes, of course. I shall know one immediately.
Yeah, so I do a lot of different things, really. I'm fortunate that I have a publisher with Fahrenheit Press, so that kind of takes a little bit of the burden away from having to promote. But I think it's a reality for every author, whether you're self-published or you're top of the tree. You have to do a lot of it yourself and online and so on, and events if you can. So yeah, like Paul and Andy, I'm kind of thinking, do I spend an hour now doing some promotion, or do I try and do another 1,000 words or whatever I can kind of sort of squeeze out in between tweet earnestly about football and music. So yeah, it is difficult in that sense, isn't it? And lockdown probably hasn't really changed that in a lot of ways. But yeah, in terms of making a living, I kind of write part-time effectively. I do some bookkeeping, which is kind of what I used to do before I started writing. And I organise the Hull Noir Crime Festival with a couple of other people. So that's kind of something that gives me a lot of work with workshops and reading groups and things like that around the region. But obviously that's fallen through this year with the pandemic. So a lot of my promotion was going to centre around the Hull Noir Crime Festival for the new book. That'd have been a nice platform to launch it off, but obviously we've had to postpone to next March as it stands. So yeah, I'm in the same boat as everybody else in that sense. We're all just trying to navigate the new landscape, aren't we, in terms of using online tools like this with the chats and so on. And it's different and it's fun, but yeah, it is a constant battle between thinking, do I use my time to promote or do I use my time to write? And you want to write, don't you? Really, that's what you are. You're a writer.
So picking up on Andy's thing about newsletters, do you have like readers groups and things where you get feedback on your work or use them to help you promote?
I do have a newsletter, which I'm thinking, listening to Andy saying there's got 8,000 people on it, and I'm thinking I need to get myself a newsletter. That sounds like, I think that's good advice, isn't it, generally for authors to have a newsletter. That's kind of one of those things that's always flagged up to you that, publishers can kind of control the copyright of your books and so on, but you own the rights to a mailing list, so that's a really useful thing to have. But yeah, in terms of promoting it, I've been quite fortunate. I've been invited to an awful lot of festivals and library events around the region and further afield, so I get a chance to sort of network that way with people. But yeah, in terms of feedback, I have a couple of other friends online who I kind of swap work with effectively, which is always useful for getting sort of initial feedback. I think you just have to find the right people for your own fit, don't you, with that type of thing, really, and then it's a case of just trying to make it work, really.
What about you, Andy?
You broke up, Caroline. Say again.
I said, what about you, Andy? I know you've got a readers group, haven't you?
Yeah, I've got the exclusive readers group on Facebook. That's worldwide. It's a nice place to be. There's some great admins on there who publish cartoons and quizzes and stuff. There's Rudy Pan and there's Patty. There's a lot of people on there. There's about 500 or 600 people on there, and that's good. It's a nice busy place. It's a good place to hang out, have a laugh, and I also do polls on there as well, like which book cover do you like best and which blurb do you like best. That's very, very handy. Get a lot of good feedback from that. I still do have an Eddie Collins Facebook page as well, and I've done that sort of from Eddie Collins' point of view, bearing in mind he's a sarcastic git and people don't like him, but people love him as well. He's a black and white kind of guy, but that's very difficult to fit in with the other Facebook things I've got going as well. So I tend to neglect his page a little bit, if you like. Then I'm a member of UK Crime Book Club and one or two others as well. UK Crime Book Club happens to be my favourite Facebook page, by the way.
Well said.
And I was there from about day 3, I think, wasn't I? Something like that.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah, I think I was.
You were there from the very beginning.
Yeah, and it's brilliant. I love it. And you and your dad do a hell of a lot to promote those people. It's fantastic. I'll always come back. It's brilliant.
Paul?
Yeah, obviously UK Crime Book Club's my favourite as well.
You don't have to say that.
You know what? I've bought more books since I've been a member of this club than ever before. My red pile is just getting bigger and bigger. It's a wonderful place, but it's costing me money. And I don't have readers groups or anything. I'm listening to these two guys and thinking perhaps I should be looking into that. I do have a Facebook authors page, but again, I tend to neglect it. I think is probably the brutal truth of it. Writing whilst working full time means that it takes a while, and there's not always updates to give in the same way as if I was putting more hours into it. So no, when I'm writing, I don't have people to go to in that way. I have I have one good friend of mine, a guy called John Featherstone, who's always a writer, great writer, well worth checking out, who absolutely is the go-to person for the read of the first draft and the brutal honesty about the holes that undoubtedly are in there. So I value that massively. We do that for one another. But no, beyond that, I'm in a bit of a cocoon, I think I would say.
You've mentioned John Featherstone, and he asked us a question on the stream.
That's a bless him. I hope it's not a horrible one.
It was, why did you have Paul on the panel? No, it says, how much of an impact do current affairs have on your writing?
The current affairs have. Are you sure? Yeah. Why have you got Paul as well as the proper writers? Thanks, John. Yeah. I'll add in words later. Current affairs. Yeah, it's interesting. It inevitably has an impact. I think for me, less so over the last 6 months, because I've taken to just not reading the news, where there's not reading or listening to, where there's an awful lot been said and not an awful lot of content as we've gone through the pandemic. Prior to that, the media reaction to things that have happened. So my most recent writing is set immediately after the awful Charlie Hebdo murders in Paris, and there was just the feel of things at that time, bringing how different groups were reacting on the far right, the far left, how they were reported, the BBC's hopelessly skewed reporting of those things and focusing on whether this word or that word was more important when actually we were talking about life and death situations. It has to have an impact. It's part of the world that I'm in, and I think you can't help but reflect that through your writing. Otherwise, you'd be writing. I don't know. Otherwise, it seems very detached. Might be different if you're writing something historical, but anything that's set in the here or now, or I guess in my lifetime, you can't get away from what's happening culturally and how it's reported in the media and so on. It's interesting. Sorry, I was just going to add. It's interesting because it allows you to explore in the way that they might explore what a left-wing extremist and a right-wing extremist might be doing, and the good and bad in all parts of society. But also, it gives you something different to bounce off the way that different outlets report some of the things that are happening. Sorry, mate. Do go.
I find I'm sort of the complete opposite, really. I haven't watched the news since Brexit. I hate the news. I just found everything, no matter where you looked, so depressing, and the inaccuracies as well were abound everywhere. I get my news from the wife. If there's anything worth reporting, she just tells me that's fine. I bury my head in the sand. I don't mean I'm a bad person or anything. I prefer not to get caught up in news. Really, I really do. And I don't use any of it in books anyway. And that's all that interests me. It might be a bit inward looking, I suppose, but I'm not bothered about news. I hate it.
I'm kind of the opposite of you, Andy. I'm a news junkie. I think I can't stop watching the rolling news channels. I'm just obsessed with it.
I can get a power cable. Bear with me a second. Carry on.
As a writer, though, I have to boil it down to Hull with the Joe Garrity novel. So I'm always thinking about. I'm obviously aware, like when Paul's talking about the wider international things that are going on, but I'm looking at things like Brexit and how will that impact on a northern city like Hull that relies on its port for trading. How will that filter through to everyday lives in the city? And to an extent, you may be guessing or giving an opinion, but I'm looking for things like that. How I'm going to feature that into my novel and how it's going to work in terms of power within the city and with money within the city and relationships. And that's kind of where my interest is. But I think when we're talking current affairs and we're talking about the pandemic, I have no interest in writing about that in my novels. I think we're all probably absolutely sick of it, aren't we, as people and human beings. So, I'm taking a punt on the novel that I'm writing now that by this time next year we'll be largely kind of living fairly normal lives again, and that people will talk about the pandemic in the way they talk about the weather maybe when they first meet. So, they're not maybe shaking hands like they used to, my characters, but generally speaking, I'm not going to reference the pandemic in my work.
Fair enough. I'm going to ask you now a question that Nick's been asked before because I've interviewed him recently, and it's a UK CBC favourite.
I should have a good answer then, shouldn't I?
Hopefully.
What's your favourite cheese?
No, it's what's your most memorable moments as an author? Because we always get really interesting answers when we ask our.
Sorry, just said the most memorable moment.
As an author.
Wow, I think for me, it was undoubtedly getting the reply to the first book that was published as a non-fiction book called Choose Life, and getting a response to say, yes, we like this, we love this, we want to work with you, we're going to put, I think that's kind of 10, 11 years ago. But as a moment where you go, I've been tapping away on my laptop for however long with that massive imposter syndrome that has never gone away, to be fair, and it comes and goes. Where you write something that you're in love with and sit there the next day going, who am I kidding? Who am I to think I can write a book? That kind of validation, I guess, from somebody who's in the industry around publishing was probably the highest moment for me in all of
that. My writing life began in about 85. I wrote some real crap stuff back then, and it didn't start coming together. Probably an apprenticeship served up until about 97, something like that. And from 97 to 2004, I wrote the Roger Coniston books, and they were okay. But they got me an agent, and that relationship lasted about a year before he bailed out of his company, and it went south from there. So that was, I suppose, that was a high point, getting an agent, because you think, oh, I made it at last, and it really wasn't. And then a couple of years ago, I got taken on by Bloodhound. That relationship lasted again about a year, and I suppose it's partly my fault in that I'm a bit of a control freak over my little book empire, everything to do with it. And we parted company on after about a year after that. And I'm back doing it myself again now, and I absolutely adore what I do. I really love writing, and I love everything surrounding it. It takes a hell of a lot of time and a lot of commitment. But if you've got that dream that you want to be a writer, I don't know if being a published writer is any different from being a writer. As long as you want to be a writer and you can find the time and the drive to do it, then that's great. But one of the best things, Caroline, one of the little high points in my subdued writing career, if you like, is your dad. When he was raving about Ledston Luck, because he absolutely adored the Divine Right character from Ledston Luck. And that really gives you a good ego boost when somebody who reads an awful lot like your dad does, when he likes a character that you've created, it's a big boost for you. So that's actually one of the high points, believe it or not.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I think when somebody gets what you're doing, it's an amazing feeling, isn't it? It's absolutely brilliant that somebody takes the time to contact you and say, I really liked your book, and they really understand what you're trying to do with it. So I think that's amazing. I've been very fortunate. I've been invited to a lot of sort of events and festivals over the years now, and probably the high point was the Harrogate Crime Festival, the Old Fiefdoms Festival in Harrogate. And when you talk about imposter syndrome, I got invited to sit on a panel about Yorkshire crime with people like Peter Robinson, Francis Brodie, Steve Mosby, and bizarrely Lee Child. So I found myself on stage in front of 700 or 800 people talking to Lee Child, thinking, it was the most terrifying thing I've ever done in my life, as well as being, massively exhilarating. So that was, I kind of look back on that and I think, wow, I probably never would get in front of an audience with people with Lee Child again. That was something quite incredible. And for my last book, I managed to have a launch party in Hull with friends and family coming along, and we sold out like a small theatre space for that, and that was really kind of a really high point to say, wow, I've kind of done this in front of my friends and family. But yeah, there's been kind of some nice events I've been able to do. I got out to Reykjavik, to Iceland a few years back, which again, you kind of think I'm sat on an aeroplane and somebody's paying for me to go to Iceland to talk about my work. How does that happen? But yeah, I think it's all those little moments, isn't it? When somebody likes your book, or you connect with somebody over writing like that. Those are kind of the moments that count out there, really. So yeah, I mean, I've had some good moments, and I think like everybody, there's them moments where you think, I've travelled to Bradford to do a book signing and there's no book there for me to sign. That's not particularly great. I'll have to go back home to Hull again. But that's writing, isn't it? There's lots of kind of like little victories as you go along. But it's about the writing, isn't it, really? That's the fun.
they're really always good answers. That's why it's one of our favourite questions, because we like to. We always get really interesting answers. There's
I
another.
think you should consider using the cheese question. That's probably quite illuminating.
There's another question on here that says, "Do you read the reviews of your books?"
Yes, is the simple answer. It's with bated breath, but yes. In the first instance, I think for a first draft, I'm kind of writing for myself. As we get through that, and hopefully you're left with something that you can polish repeatedly into a finished article. That process, I think that's where the magic happens for me. I'm certain of it. But during that process of rewriting, I'm then writing for the reader. I'm writing for other people at that point. So yeah, it's like people have said in the last few minutes. You really want to see that people get what you're doing and you're not just banging out a story with a twist and somebody can't figure out who done it. That there's more to it, that there are themes in there, there's subplots, there's depth of character and location and everything else. And much as you kind of think, what if people hate it? Well, I do. To read a review and think, yeah, somebody's really got it, or just the fact they've really enjoyed it, that they found it. That the highest compliment for me can be that it was a page turner that they loved, because I know what that's like when you're thinking, I've got to get up for work in a few hours, I have to turn the light off, but you keep turning the pages. So yes, I do read them. I don't know about anyone else. I'm very interested to see what the other two gentlemen here say to this one.
Yeah, I read them. I read them because if somebody's taking the time and trouble to write a review on your book, then the least you could do is read that review, I think, and you can learn a lot from it as well. You might find out what they like and what they don't like, and if you get a consensus of people who leave reviews who mention the same thing, you can learn from that and change your writing style for the next time, perhaps. But like Paul says, if you can get so many people who leave a review who understand what you're doing, and even if you write about it in a subtle or secretive way, they get it. It gives you a real buzz. It does for me anyway. If you write a story from A to Z and you've included in that lots of tiny little nuances, and it's those nuances, if people get those, it's euphoric. This is why I love writing so much. It's euphoric for people to get what you're saying, even though you've hidden it. I love that. Yeah, I do read reviews. I love reading them. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I'm the same as both of you, I guess, in some respects. Like Paul, I'm kind of, if I look at them, you go in with bated breath, that you think, bloody hell, what people are going to say. But you can't. Well, there is something to be learned from them as well at the same time. So it does kind of make sense. But I can't remember who told me now, but somebody said, don't get too carried away with the 5-star reviews, and don't get too downhearted with the 1-star reviews. You're kind of somewhere in the middle, aren't you, generally speaking? So just trying to keep some what people say, I think, is important as well, because you don't want to let yourself get carried away thinking you're the next and ranking it, and you don't want to kind of read the 1-star reviews and think, oh, I best never write a single word ever again. Because it's horses for courses, isn't it? Some people will really get what you're trying to do and will really enjoy it, and other people, won't. Because I guess we're all readers, aren't we, as well? So there'll be books we read where we maybe don't enjoy them, where there may be a book I rave about that you two guys think is absolutely terrible. So yeah, I think you just have to keep a little bit of perspective on reviews, don't you, and try not to get too emotionally distracted by them, possibly. But equally, it's very difficult to avoid them as well, isn't it? You kind of have to look at the same time, I think.
So do you all read like a lot of crime? And if you do, who are your like go-to authors, like your shut up and take my money authors, I call them, the ones where you don't read the back of the books? You're just going to buy
Yeah, I do read a lot of crime. I don't only read crime, and my go-to authors aren't just crime writers. A couple of examples would be Bernard Cornwell. Yes, just give me the next one, please. Thank you very much. I'm eagerly awaiting the last one of the Last Kingdom series that's due out very shortly. Stephen King, who I find him hard to categorise as a writer, but is absolutely phenomenal. And a big fan of his. Crime it's so difficult to say because there are so many authors. I'm trying to. I read fairly broadly. There's probably 60% of my to be read pile are crime, but I keep reading those first and then buying more crime. The non-crime books tend to sit there sometimes for a long, long time. Yeah, I'm struggling to name names really, in terms of what I think of purely as crime. But the sort of people that you'd certainly say were in a sort of a thriller kind of genre, that have had probably quite an impact on me as a writer, as well as loving reading them, will be the likes of Harlan Coben. Fantastic, absolutely incredible means of creating characters that I care about. I mean, he's known as the master of the twist, isn't he? I can remember reading one book, I won't say which one, that's because I've forgotten. It twisted and turned and twisted and turned so many times. I didn't know what was going on. And anybody else, I would have put that book down, but I cared so much what happened to the characters, I read it anyway. Simon Koenig will be another great example, particularly his early stuff. The pace of his early books, wow. It's like nothing I'd ever seen before. And although that's slowed a bit as he's matured as a writer, that will be another one that I still automatically pick up as a must-have.
I don't read as much as I should do. I certainly don't read as much as I want to do. I find time a really constricting factor at the moment. Well, throughout my life, it's always been a constricting factor. I don't get to play. I don't get to do what I like to do, except for writing, of course. But the last one I read was Killing Pretties by Rob Ashman. I thought it was brilliant. I really enjoyed that. But I like Callie Taylor as well. I like the psychological stuff. There's a few others as well. Craven, he's another one that's good.
Yeah.
There's Kathy Reichs as well. There's all kinds of Peter May, another one that's good. I like loads of writers, and I'll pick and choose all day writers.
Yeah.
There's like that one. It's where do you stop?
Yeah, I think that's the great thing about crime, isn't it? It's such a wide genre that you can choose anything, whether it's on fast-paced thrillers Paul's talking about, or the more sort of like psychological suspense of Callie Taylor that you were talking about, Andy. But yeah, I mean, for me, I read widely in the genre. So I always read Ian Rankin, Michael Connolly, the kind of the top dogs, Matt Billingham. I hugely enjoy Eva Dolan's work, for writing about contemporary issues. Cathy Unsworth for the same. There's tons, isn't there? There's absolutely tons. I'm loving Lou Berney, the US author at the moment. He wrote November Road recently, which is probably the most perfect crime novel I've read in the last 4 or 5 years. The list is literally endless, isn't it? My to be read pile's a mountain, I think, rather than a pile these days. It's there's so much good stuff out there, isn't there?
There is.
Is it? It's Andy Weir, The Martian. That was brilliant. I loved that.
Yeah.
Was it Paul mentioned Bernard Cornwell? The Winter Trilogy, for me, that was outstanding. I absolutely loved that. I thought I'd get on with there's Tolkien as well. I enjoyed that. What's George R.R. Martin? I couldn't get into that. I loved watching the Game of Thrones, but I couldn't read it for tuppence. I didn't like that at all. But
They're big books.
What?
They're big books, aren't they? They're commitment books, really.
Yeah.
No, it's okay. We've got 2 minutes left of our panel. It's just flown by because it's been such a pleasure talking to you all. So we're going to go round in the order we've been going again for one last time. Just remind us what you write.
Okay. My books, there are only three available. The non-fiction book Choose Life, which was very much the kind of personal development and growth, tripping over the stresses and strains of 21st century living. I moved on to fiction, and The Big V was kind of a bittersweet sort of novella, 40,000 words novella. That's kind of hopes and dreams, almost a Mitch Albom kind of vibe about it. And then The Big V, where I found my feet, the area that excites me the most as a crime writer, Smoke Without Fire, that basically opened. All my books start now with an opening scene as a guy with 2 teenage daughters opens the front door to a knock, and there's a load of police officers there. He's mistakenly arrested on child pornography charges. What on earth do you do? Where do you go? And it goes from there. I'll stop so everybody's got time. I could talk about that for hours.
I've written the Roger Conister trilogy. That's a soccer based in the sort of the turn of the century, 1999, 2000 onwards. Then I wrote the big book, The Third Rule, which started out as 260,000, which I locked down to about 180,000, I think. Then that series continued into a 6-book series now, ending with This Side of Death. I'll do what everybody else does. That's the latest one out. There's 4 novellas as well.
Excellent. I write the Joe Geraghty series of private investigator novels set in my home city of Hull. Joe's a small-time private investigator who gets himself into all types of mischief around issues of money and power and so on in the city. And the latest one, Sands of the Sinners, was published on Friday by Fahrenheit Press.
Excellent. And all that's left for me to say is thank you to all of you for taking part, and to everybody else, go and buy some of all their books, because I've read all of them and they're fantastic. And thank you.
Thank you. Enjoyed.